The crash ripped through the atmosphere of Kepler 452b. Like a meteor, Victor Lane's scout ship breaking apart as it hit the dense jungle canopy. His consciousness flickered between the violent impact and the eerie silence that followed. The emergency beacon activated automatically as the ship's systems failed one by one, its persistent beeping the only sound besides his labored breathing and the crackle of electrical fires. Victor tried to move, immediately regretting it as white-hot pain shot through his left leg. Looking down, he saw a jagged piece of the control panel had impaled his thigh, blood soaking through his flight suit. His right arm hung uselessly at his side, clearly dislocated at the shoulder. "Fantastic," he muttered, tasting copper in his mouth. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead into his eyes, blurring his vision. The colony was at least 50 kilometers away, but the emergency beacon should bring help assuming anyone was monitoring frequencies on this side of the planet. He tried to access the ship's systems, but the console was dead. The viewscreen had shattered, allowing the planet's humid air to seep in, carrying strange, sweet-smelling spores that made his head swim. Victor's training kicked in. He needed to stop the bleeding and stabilize himself until rescue arrived. With his good arm, he ripped strips from the emergency medical kit and fashioned a crude tourniquet above the metal shard. The pain nearly made him black out, but he forced himself to stay conscious. The last thing he remembered before darkness claimed him was the distant sound of something large moving through the jungle toward his crash site. When Victor awoke, he was no longer in his ship. The ceiling above him was curved and composed of a strange, pearlescent material that reflected soft blue light. He tried to sit up, but found himself restrained to what felt like a medical table. "Please do not attempt to move," came a melodic, clicking voice from somewhere to his right. Victor turned his head, wincing at the stiffness in his neck. Standing beside him was a tall, slender being with 4 arms and iridescent blue-green skin. Its large, compound eyes studied him with what Victor could only interpret as concern. The alien wore something resembling a medical uniform with various instruments attached to a belt around its narrow waist. "Where am I?" Victor croaked, his throat painfully dry. The alien moved one of its 4 hands to a nearby container, extracting what looked like a gelatinous cube. "You are in medical facility Zenith 12, approximately 42 of your kilometers from your crash site. I am Nurse Thexel. You are severely injured, human. The extraction team found you unconscious and in critical condition." Victor tried to assess his injuries. The metal shard had been removed from his leg, but intense pain still radiated from the wound. His dislocated shoulder had been reset, but the entirety of his right side felt like it was on fire. Each breath brought a stabbing sensation in his ribs, suggesting several fractures. "How long have I been here?" Victor asked, struggling against the restraints. "Approximately 14 standard hours," Nurse Thexel replied, moving closer. "Please cease your movements. Your skeletal structure has sustained significant trauma, including 17 fractures. The metal that penetrated your leg damaged major blood vessels and muscle tissue. We have only recently stabilized your condition." Victor ignored the warning, continuing to test the restraints. "I need to contact my colony. They'll be looking for me." "We have sent communications to your settlement," Thexel said, its voice taking on a more urgent tone. "Please, human, you must remain still. Your species' physiology is different from ours, and we have limited experience treating humans. Any sudden movement could reopen your wounds or displace the bone-mending compounds we have administered." Victor looked down at his leg, now encased in some sort of translucent material that pulsed with a soft green light. "What is this?" "A regenerative matrix," Thexel explained, adjusting something on a nearby panel. "It accelerates cellular repair while preventing infection. Your leg suffered extensive damage. The matrix needs time to work." Victor considered his options. He was deep in alien territory, injured and alone. The Keplerian natives had maintained a cautious but peaceful relationship with human colonists since their arrival 5 years ago, but this was the first time Victor had direct contact with them. The diplomatic protocols called for cooperation in emergency situations. "How long until I can move?" he asked, relaxing slightly against the table. Thexel's compound eyes blinked in a pattern Victor couldn't interpret. For a Keplerian, recovery would require approximately 30 cycles. For a human, the nurse paused, calculating. "Based on our limited data, at least 15 of your Earth days before you can attempt minimal weight-bearing activities." 15 days, Victor scoffed, immediately trying to sit up again. The restraints tightened in response. "I can't stay here that long. I need to get back to the colony." "Please?" Thexel's voice rose in what sounded like alarm. All 4 of its arms moved in frantic gestures. "You must not move. The bone-mending compounds are still bonding with your human tissue. Disruption now could cause permanent damage to your skeletal structure." Victor grimaced through the pain but continued struggling. "I've walked off worse than this. Just patch me up with whatever you've got and point me toward the colony." Thexel made a sound that Victor's translator interpreted as distress. "This is not like a minor injury, human. Your femur was shattered in 3 places. Your tibia has compound fractures. 4 ribs are broken, 1 dangerously close to puncturing your lung. Your shoulder socket sustained microfractures that our medical technology is still working to repair." Victor paused, taking stock of the pain signals his body was sending. Maybe the alien wasn't exaggerating. Still, 15 days seemed excessive. "I've been injured on expeditions before. Human bodies are resilient. We heal quickly." "Not from injuries of this magnitude," Thexel insisted, moving to a console and bringing up holographic images that Victor recognized as scans of his body. The nurse pointed with one of its upper limbs at the glowing red areas. "These indicate severe trauma. This one here shows internal bleeding we have only recently managed to control." Victor studied the images, his bravado faltering slightly. The damage did look extensive. "Look," he said, adopting a more reasonable tone, "I appreciate your help, but my team needs to know I'm alive. Can I at least send a direct message?" Thexel seemed to relax slightly. "We have already informed your colony of your survival and condition. They have acknowledged receipt of our communication. A representative expressed their gratitude and agreed it would be dangerous to move you prematurely." Victor frowned. "Who did you speak with?" The communication identified the responder as Colonial Director Samantha Wells. That made sense. Sam would follow protocol, which meant leaving Victor in alien care until he was stable enough for transport. She was nothing if not by the book. "Fine," Victor conceded reluctantly. "But I'm not staying here for 15 days. What can you do to speed up the process?" Thexel approached the medical table, its movements more measured now. "We have already implemented accelerated healing protocols, which is why I specified 15 days rather than 30. The regenerative matrix is customized for your human physiology based on the limited data we have. Rushing the process further could lead to complications." Victor sighed, wincing as his ribs protested. "Can you at least loosen these restraints? I promise not to do anything stupid." Thexel seemed to consider this request. "I can adjust them for your comfort, but they must remain in place to prevent accidental movement during the critical bonding phase." The nurse manipulated something on the control panel, and Victor felt the restraints loosen slightly. "Thank you," he said, trying to find a more comfortable position. "So, what exactly happened after I crashed? The last thing I remember is setting up a tourniquet." Thexel moved around the table, checking various readings on monitors Victor couldn't see from his position. "Our patrol detected your ship's emergency beacon. When the extraction team arrived, you were unconscious with a dangerously low body temperature and significant blood loss. The tourniquet you applied likely saved your life, though it was close to causing tissue death in your extremity." "Lucky timing," Victor remarked. "Indeed. The patrol was not scheduled for that quadrant until the following cycle. Your beacon's frequency triggered our medical response protocols. Thexel paused, seeming to hesitate before continuing. Your crash site is in a restricted ecological preservation zone. May I inquire what brought your vessel to that area? Victor tensed. The mission had been classified a resource survey for the colony's expansion plans. The area was supposedly uninhabited according to their scans. Navigation error, he lied smoothly. I was mapping the western ridge and got caught in a magnetic storm. Systems failed and I lost control. Thexel's compound eyes focused on Victor in a way that suggested skepticism. The western ridge is 70 kilometers from where you were found. Like I said, I lost control. The ship was in free fall for quite a while before I managed partial stabilization. Victor changed the subject quickly. How long until I can at least sit up properly? If your vital signs remain stable and the regenerative matrix continues to function optimally, perhaps 3 days for supervised sitting posture, Thexel answered, apparently allowing the subject change. 3 days of lying flat on his back in an alien medical facility. Victor suppressed a groan. And you're sure there's no way to speed this up further? We humans have some pretty advanced medical tech of our own at the colony. We are aware of your technology, Thexel said, its voice taking on what Victor interpreted as a slightly defensive tone. Our methods are different but highly effective. The regenerative matrix is adapting to your physiology with each passing hour. Victor was about to respond when a sharp pain shot through his leg, causing him to gasp. The green glow in the translucent casing intensified briefly. What was that? He asked through gritted teeth. The matrix is dissolving necrotic tissue and stimulating new cellular growth, Thexel explained, checking a readout. The process can cause temporary discomfort as nerve endings regenerate. Discomfort is putting it mildly, Victor muttered. I can administer a pain suppressant compatible with your biology, Thexel offered, already reaching for something on a nearby tray. No, Victor said quickly. I need to stay alert. Pain suppressants often clouded his thinking, and he needed his wits about him in unfamiliar territory. Thexel made a clicking sound that the translator didn't convert. Refusing pain management is counterproductive to healing. Stress hormones can slow the regenerative process. Just give me something mild then, Victor compromised. Something that takes the edge off but doesn't make me drowsy. Thexel selected a different vial from the tray and attached it to a device that resembled an injector. This is a neural pathway modulator. It reduces pain signal intensity without affecting cognitive function. The nurse pressed the device against Victor's neck, and he felt a cool sensation spread through his body. The relief was almost immediate. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it receded to a manageable throb rather than the sharp, stabbing sensations from before. That's much better, Victor acknowledged. Thank you. Thexel's posture seemed to relax slightly. You should rest now. Your body needs to conserve energy for healing. I've been unconscious for 14 hours. I'm not exactly tired. Rest does not necessarily mean sleep, Thexel explained patiently. Minimal physical and mental exertion will allow your body to direct more resources toward repair, Victor sighed. Can I at least have something to look at, a data pad or viewing screen? Lying here staring at the ceiling isn't going to help me rest. Thexel considered the request. Visual stimulation without physical exertion is acceptable. The nurse manipulated a control, and a section of the pearlescent ceiling transformed into what appeared to be a viewing screen. This can display various calming scenarios or educational materials. What would you prefer? Show me where we are, Victor requested. An external view of this facility and the surrounding area. The screen shifted to show an aerial view of a sprawling complex nestled in a clearing within the dense jungle. The architecture was unlike anything in the human colony organic-looking structures that seemed to grow from the landscape, rather than being built upon it. The medical facility appeared to be one of the larger buildings, its dome-like roof glowing faintly in the late afternoon sunlight. Impressive, Victor admitted. I had no idea you had settlements this large so close to our colony. This is not a settlement, Thexel corrected. It is a research and preservation outpost. We maintain several throughout this region to study and protect the indigenous ecosystem. Victor's mind raced with implications. If this was just an outpost, how extensive was the actual Keplerian civilization? The human colonists had been operating under the assumption that the aliens were primarily nomadic with only small permanent settlements. How many Keplerians live here? He asked casually. The outpost houses approximately 230 researchers and support personnel, Thexel answered. It is one of our smaller facilities. Victor tried not to show his surprise. The colony's intelligence estimates had been way off, and you're all scientists. Many are specialists in xenobiology, ecology, and planetary science. Others, like myself, provide essential services. Thexel adjusted something on the medical table. Your curiosity is understandable, but extended conversation requires energy your body needs for healing. Victor recognized the gentle but firm shutdown. Just one more question. Why did you become a nurse? Do Keplerians choose their professions like humans do? Thexel seemed surprised by the personal nature of the question. After a moment's hesitation, the nurse responded. I was genetically predisposed for medical service based on aptitude testing during early development. However, specialization within the medical field is a choice. I selected emergency trauma care because I find satisfaction in preserving life functions during critical moments. That's not so different from humans, Victor noted. We often follow paths we're naturally suited for, though some rebel against it. And you, Thexel asked, were you predisposed to pilot spacecraft into restricted areas? Victor couldn't help but smile at the subtle dig. Touché, I was always good with machines and navigation. The exploration part came naturally. Thexel made a gesture that Victor interpreted as acknowledgement. You should rest now. I will return periodically to check your progress and adjust the regenerative matrix. As the nurse moved toward the exit, Victor called out, Thexel. Thank you for saving my life. The Keplerian paused, turning back. That is my function, but you are welcome, Victor Lane. Left alone, Victor studied the aerial view still displayed on the ceiling screen, mentally mapping the facility's layout and surrounding terrain. Despite Thexel's care, he had no intention of staying put for 15 days. As soon as he could move without tearing himself apart, he needed to get back to the colony with what he'd learned about the Keplerian presence. The next 3 days passed in a frustrating cycle of treatments, examinations, and increasingly strained conversations with Thexel. The nurse remained professional, but seemed to grow more suspicious of Victor's persistent questions about the facility layout, Keplerian technology, and communication systems. On the 4th day, Thexel finally removed the restraints and helped Victor sit upright for the first time since his arrival. The pain was substantial but manageable with the neural modulators. Your healing progresses well, Thexel observed, studying readings from the regenerative matrix still encasing Victor's leg. The bone fusion is approximately 60% complete, and the muscle tissue has begun to reconnect properly. Victor flexed his right arm cautiously. The shoulder still ached, but he had regained most of its range of motion. What about my ribs? The fractures have stabilized, but are not fully healed. Deep breathing exercises will begin tomorrow to prevent pulmonary complications. Thexel adjusted the back of the medical table to support Victor in his sitting position. You have exhibited remarkable resilience for your species. Told you humans heal quickly, Victor said with a hint of pride. Your recovery rate is indeed approximately 22% faster than our models predicted, Thexel acknowledged. However, this does not mean you are ready for ambulation. Ambulation? You mean walking. Victor raised an eyebrow. I thought we might try that today. Thexel's reaction was immediate and emphatic. Absolutely not. Attempting to bear weight on your leg at this stage would disrupt the bone fusion process and potentially cause catastrophic structural failure. I'm not talking about running a marathon, Victor argued. Just a few steps to keep my muscles from atrophying. Your muscles are being stimulated by the regenerative matrix to prevent atrophy, Thexel countered. Physical therapy will begin when the bone structure is sufficiently stable, not before. Victor decided to try a different approach. I understand your concern, but lying here is taking a psychological toll. Even a short, supported walk would do wonders for my mental state. Thexel studied him with those unreadable compound eyes. Your attempt to manipulate me using psychological welfare arguments is noted but ineffective. The matrix data clearly shows your bones cannot support your weight yet. Victor couldn't help but laugh. You caught me, worth a try though. Your persistence is remarkable, Thexel said, a note of what might have been amusement in the translated voice. Perhaps we can compromise. Tomorrow, I will bring a mobility assistance device that will allow you to move short distances without placing weight on your injured leg. Like crutches. Victor perked up. Our version is more sophisticated, but the principle is similar, Thexel confirmed. It will support your entire body weight while allowing controlled movement. That's a start, Victor conceded. Thank you. After Thexel left, Victor began testing his limits more aggressively than he had dared with the nurse present. He carefully swung his uninjured leg over the side of the medical table and tried to gauge how much weight his injured leg might actually bear. The answer was immediately clear as searing pain shot up from his thigh. Thexel wasn't exaggerating about the bones being unable to support him. Still, Victor noted that the monitoring equipment seemed to react when he moved. If he was going to attempt an early departure, he would need to disable or deceive those sensors somehow. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That night, while most of the facility had entered its rest cycle, an alarm sounded throughout the medical wing. Victor heard hurried movement in the corridor outside his room, followed by Thexel's voice speaking rapidly in the native Keplerian language to someone. The door to his room slid open, and Thexel entered, all four arms busy with various pieces of equipment. We have an emergency situation. A research team has returned with severe injuries from a containment breach. I must attend to them immediately. Is there anything I can do to help? Victor offered, genuinely concerned but also seeing a potential opportunity. No, Thexel replied firmly. You must remain here. Your monitoring system is linked to my personal alert device. I will know if your condition changes. The nurse hesitated, then added, the emergency may require several hours of my attention. Your evening nutrient infusion and pain modulator have been pre-programmed for automated delivery. I understand. Go help your people, Victor said solemnly. Thexel nodded and hurried out, the door sliding shut behind the nurse. Victor waited 15 minutes, listening to the continued commotion in the corridor. Then he carefully disconnected the monitoring sensors attached to his chest and arms. The machine began to emit a low warning tone, which he quickly silenced by locating and pressing what appeared to be a mute button. Next came the difficult part, the regenerative matrix on his leg. After examining it closely, Victor identified what seemed to be a release mechanism at the top of the device. When he pressed it, the matrix separated along a seam, allowing him to carefully extract his leg. The pain hit him immediately, no longer suppressed by the matrix's medications. Victor gritted his teeth, fighting through it as he swung both legs over the side of the table. The promised mobility device was nowhere to be found, but he spotted something resembling a maintenance staff leaning against the wall, probably left by a custodial worker. Using the staff for support, Victor eased himself upright, keeping all weight off his injured leg. The room spun momentarily, and he had to grab the medical table to steady himself. Once the dizziness passed, he hobbled to a storage cabinet and found what looked like medical supplies. Among them was a device similar to the pain modulator Thexel had used. Victor pressed it against his neck, guessing at the dosage, and felt blessed relief spread through his body. The corridor outside was empty, the emergency having drawn staff to another section of the facility. Victor consulted his mental map from the aerial view he'd studied and began making his way toward what he believed was an exit, using the staff as a makeshift crutch. Each step was agony despite the pain modulator, but Victor pressed on, driven by the urgent need to report what he'd learned about the Keplerian presence. If their small outpost housed over 200 individuals, how large was their actual civilization? The colony needed this intelligence. Victor had made it about halfway to his goal when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Human Victor Lane, stop immediately." He turned to see Thexel rushing toward him, all four arms outstretched in what appeared to be alarm or supplication. "I have to get back to my people," Victor explained, continuing his painful progress down the corridor. "You will cause irreparable damage to your leg." Thexel moved in front of him, blocking his path. "The bone fusion is incomplete. Every step risks catastrophic structural failure." "I appreciate everything you've done," Victor said, trying to maneuver around the nurse, "but I need to report back to the colony." "Report what?" Thexel asked, compound eyes fixed on Victor. "That we saved your life after you crashed in a restricted preservation zone. That we have provided medical care beyond what your colony could offer." Victor hesitated. "Your outpost is much larger than we were led to believe. The colony needs to know the full extent of the Keplerian presence on this planet." Understanding seemed to dawn in Thexel's posture. "You believe we concealed our numbers as a threat to your colony?" The nurse's translated voice carried what sounded like disappointment. "We have always been transparent about our presence. Your colonial leaders have been provided with detailed information about our research outposts." "What?" Victor stopped, confused. "But our intelligence reports are perhaps not shared equally among all your people," Thexel suggested gently. "Your director Wells has visited this facility twice in the past cycle. We maintain regular communication with your colonial administration." Victor leaned heavily on the staff, the pain in his leg intensifying as the adrenaline of his escape attempt began to fade. This didn't align with what he'd been told before his survey mission. "If that's true, why was I sent to map a supposedly uninhabited region that turns out to be one of your preservation zones?" Thexel's four arms made a complex gesture that Victor couldn't interpret. "That question would be better directed to your colonial leadership." "Now please, you must return to medical care immediately. Your leg cannot support even the minimal weight you are placing on it." As if to emphasize Thexel's point, Victor felt something shift inside his thigh, followed by an explosion of pain that sent him crashing to the floor. He cried out, grabbing his leg as the world went white around the edges. "I tried to warn you," Thexel said, kneeling beside him and immediately applying pressure to his leg. "The bone fusion has fractured. You are bleeding internally again." Victor could barely focus through the pain. "I've walked off worse," he gasped, though even he didn't believe it anymore. "No, human, you have not," Thexel replied firmly. The nurse activated something on a wrist device, and within moments, several other Keplerians arrived with what looked like a hovering stretcher. As they carefully lifted Victor onto the stretcher, he felt a wave of shame wash over him. "I'm sorry, Thexel. I thought I was doing my duty." "Your dedication to your people is admirable," the nurse said, attaching a new pain modulator to Victor's neck as they moved quickly back toward the medical room. "But your understanding was incomplete." The next few hours passed in a blur of pain and medical procedures as Thexel and a team of specialists worked to repair the damage Victor had done to himself. When he finally regained full consciousness, he found himself back on the medical table, his leg once again encased in the regenerative matrix, which now glowed an angry red. The damage was significant, Thexel informed him, checking readings on a monitor. "The bone fusion process must begin again. You have added at least 7 days to your recovery time." Victor closed his eyes, the full weight of his mistake settling on him. "I really messed up, didn't I? Your actions were based on incomplete information," Thexel said, more kindly than Victor felt he deserved. However, I have taken the liberty of arranging a communication link with your colonial administration. Perhaps hearing the truth from your own people will help you rest and heal properly." A small screen descended from the ceiling, and Director Samantha Wells's face appeared, her expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Victor Lane, you absolute idiot," she said by way of greeting. "Nurse Thexel tells me you tried to escape on a broken leg." "Director," Victor acknowledged weakly. "I was trying to report back about the scale of the Keplerian presence. Our intelligence was exactly what it needed to be for your specific mission." Wells cut him off. "Your survey was legitimate. We do need resource mapping for potential expansion. But it was also a test of the preservation zone boundaries we established with the Keplerian High Council 3 years ago." Victor blinked in confusion. "A test? The Keplerians allowed us to settle here with certain conditions, including respecting their ecological preservation zones," Wells explained. "We need to know if our navigation systems properly alert our ships when approaching restricted areas. Yours clearly failed, which is valuable data for us to fix the system." "So you knew about this outpost all along?" Victor asked, feeling increasingly foolish. "Of course we did. The Keplerians have been nothing but transparent with us. Their medical technology alone has saved dozens of colonist lives since we established our cooperation agreement." Wells shook her head. "This information is available in the colonial database, Victor. You just never bothered to look beyond your mission parameters." Victor glanced at Thexel, who was pretending to be occupied with the medical equipment but was clearly listening to every word. "Why wasn't I briefed on any of this before my mission?" Victor asked. "Because we needed an authentic test of the navigation systems," Wells replied. "If you'd known about the preservation zones in advance, you might have compensated manually when the system failed. We needed to see if the automated warnings worked." "They didn't," Victor said flatly, clearly. Wells sighed. "Now, do us all a favor and follow Nurse Thexel's instructions." "The Keplerians are our allies, Victor. Their medical care is excellent, and you're lucky they found you when they did." After the call ended, Victor lay in silence for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned. Finally, he turned to Thexel, who was adjusting the regenerative matrix settings. "I owe you an apology," Victor said quietly, "and thank you again for saving my life, twice now." Thexel's compound eyes focused on him. "Apology accepted. Though I must admit, your species' tendency toward self-destructive behavior based on incomplete information is perplexing." Victor couldn't help but laugh, wincing as his ribs protested. "Yeah, we're kind of famous for that. I've walked off worse is practically a human motto, even when it's obviously not true." "A curious philosophy," Thexel remarked. "For future reference, what would qualify as worse than 17 fractures, major blood vessel damage, and a shattered femur?" Victor thought for a moment. "Honestly, not much. I was being an idiot." "At least you recognize it now," Thexel said, in what Victor was starting to recognize as the nurse's version of dry humor. "Perhaps this experience will encourage more caution in the future." "Don't count on it," Victor replied with a small smile. "But I promise to stay put and follow your instructions from now on." "A wise decision," Thexel agreed. "Now rest. Your body has much healing to do." Over the next 3 weeks, Victor did exactly as instructed, working with Thexel through a carefully structured rehabilitation program. The Keplerian nurse proved to be not only skilled but patient, explaining each treatment and the science behind the regenerative technology. During his recovery, Victor received regular updates from the colony and learned more about the Keplerian civilization than he had in his 5 years on the planet. The primitive aliens described in some of the early colonial reports were actually an advanced society with technology that sometimes surpassed human capabilities, particularly in the fields of medicine and ecological engineering. By the time Victor was finally cleared for transport back to the human colony, he had developed a genuine respect for Thexel and the Keplerian approach to healing. His leg had healed remarkably well, though Thexel warned he would need to continue therapy for several more weeks. As Victor prepared to board the transport shuttle sent by the colony, Thexel handed him a small device. "This contains your complete medical records and a prescribed therapy regimen," the nurse explained. "Your colonial medical facility has the equipment to continue the treatments, though their technology differs somewhat from ours." "Thank you for everything," Victor said, extending his hand in the human gesture of farewell. After a moment's hesitation, Thexel reached out with one of its 4 hands and carefully mimicked the handshake. "Should you ever crash into another of our preservation zones," Thexel said, "perhaps consider remaining still when your nurse advises it." Victor laughed. "I've definitely learned that lesson, though I still maintain humans can walk off a surprising amount of damage." "Perhaps," Thexel conceded, "but it is not always necessary or wise to do so." As the shuttle lifted off, Victor watched the Keplerian research outpost recede into the dense jungle canopy. His mission had failed in its original purpose, but had succeeded in ways he never anticipated. He had gained not just healing but understanding, and in the complex dance of human-alien relations on this distant world, that might prove to be the more valuable outcome. Back at the colony, Director Wells was waiting as medical staff helped Victor disembark from the shuttle. "Welcome back, Lane. I see the Keplerians put you back together remarkably well." "They did," Victor agreed. "Though I have to follow up with therapy for a while longer," Wells nodded. "And have you learned anything from this experience?" Victor thought about Thexel's patience, the advanced medical care he'd received, and the realization of how little he had known about their alien neighbors despite years of living on the same planet. "I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is stay still and listen," he said finally. "And that I've walked off worse isn't always the right approach, especially when dealing with beings who know more than you do." Wells smiled. "That's probably the most valuable survey data you could have brought back, Lane. Now get to the medical facility and continue your recovery. We'll debrief fully when you're cleared by our doctors." As Victor was wheeled toward the colonial medical building, he found himself looking forward to learning more about the Keplerians and their world. His crash had been painful and nearly fatal, but it had opened his eyes to realities he had been too busy or too proud to see before. Sometimes, it took being completely immobilized to truly start moving in the right direction.